kommen auch schon direkt zum nächsten Beitrag. Mit uns ist heute Ananta Pandey. Sie war zuletzt Director of Engineering beim Sidewalk Labs. Das Sidewalk Labs ist das städtische oder der städtische Innovationsaccelerator von Google, der vor allem für sein Smart City Projekt in Toronto bekannt geworden ist. Sie arbeitete mit dem GEL-Institut zusammen, um eine Open-Source-Technologie zu entwickeln, die die Inklusivität und Dynamik von öffentlichen Räumen misst. Inzwischen ist sie aber dabei, ihre eigene Foundation zu gründen, die Medley Foundation, eine gemeinnützige Organisation, die sich der Erforschung und Praxis von sozialem Zusammenhalt, Gemeinschaft und Zugehörigkeit widmet. Bald wird es auch ein Live-Lab davon im Prenzlauer Berg geben. Heute ist sie aber erstmal bei uns zu Gast in Tempelhof. Und da der Talk in Englisch sein wird, werde ich jetzt noch kurz say a couple of words in English because the talk will be in English as well. With us today is Ananta Pandey. She was the Director of Engineering at Sidewalk Labs, the Urban Innovation Accelerator of Google. She worked with the GEL Institute together to develop an open source technology that measures the inclusivity and dynamic of public spaces. Right now, she is about to found a foundation, the Medley Foundation. Soon there will be also a live lab in Prenzlauer Berg. But before she's joining us here in Tempelhof and is going to tell us a little bit more about the foundation and the idea behind it. Very welcome on stage, Ananta Pandey.
Hello. Ooh. Thank you all for joining me today. It's a very lovely day. So my name is Ananta, and I would actually like to share with you today a very personal experience of mine. But before I do that, I will introduce myself a little bit so you have some context for why I'm thinking about these things. All right, so I am a software engineer and a lover of cities. I spent the last 11 years in New York City working and living there, most recently as a director of engineering at Sidewalk Labs. You might know Sidewalk Labs from its attempt to create a smart neighborhood in the Quayside district of Toronto, Canada. But my role specifically at Sidewalk Labs was to prototype and incubate technology products that had the potential to improve the quality of life in urban areas. I led the rapid urban prototyping engineering team and spent a lot of my time thinking about how to foster feelings of inclusion and belonging in public spaces. And as Ines mentioned, my favorite prototype that we built was in collaboration with the GEL Institute for Public Life and Park People, which is a nonprofit in Toronto that helped community groups activate their public spaces. We ended up building an app that helped community groups measure the very real impact that they were having with their public space interventions on the surrounding community. All right, so a couple years ago, I read Paul Graham's essay on cities and ambition. In this essay, he talks about how every city has its own vibe. And due to that vibe, it attracts other people who have that vibe. And it's this constant feedback loop that if you live in a city, you're totally surrounded by it. And due to this feedback loop, if you are able to match your personal ambition with the ambition that a city brings out in you, you're able to supercharge that vibe within you. Think of it this way. In each of your relationships, they bring out different parts of you, and they hide different parts of you. Maybe you're really goofy with him, and you're really kind with her. Cities do the same thing. So this essay made me really think about who I wanted to be on a daily basis, and whether there was a city out there that could draw that part out of me every day. I wanted to be more authentic, more in tune with nature, less money conscious, more at ease, and I wanted to maintain my car-free lifestyle all at the same time. So, cue Berlin. Last year, I quit my job in New York and I moved to Berlin. I had never been here before. I didn't know anybody who lived here, and I didn't have any social groups lined up for me. No job, no school, no religion, no internet friends, nothing like that. And as someone who had spent years thinking about cities and belonging, this experience was really fascinating for me. By completely divorcing myself of social groups, it gave me fresh eyes with which I could see the way that a place itself can create belonging. So, in my attempt to recreate my sense of belonging and community from scratch, I found 3 observations that surprised me. I'm going to share them with you now. The first one is that repetition is the basic building block for belonging. If there were a Maslow's hierarchy of belonging, I would put repetition at the bottom. So, when I first got to Berlin, the very first month was very hard for me. I was trying really hard to meet people. I would go to all these meetups and workshops and networking events, just trying to maximize the number of people I was meeting in order to feel more rooted in place. And it wasn't working for me. At the same time, I was going to the same coffee shop around the block every morning. I would bump into the same barista. I would see the same guy reading a book, the same girl working on her laptop. And we didn't interact at all. Didn't even glance or talk to each other. But every time I would see them, I would feel a deepened sense of familiarity, more rooted in place. This observation made me realize that actually having a heartbeat with other people around you, that sense of repetition, is really important for feeling rooted. And based on that, I was able to prioritize the types of experiences I was creating for myself. So instead of going to completely random meetups, I instead joined an improv class that met 8 times. Or instead of going to 10 different craft workshops, I went to the open studio hours of a local sewing shop. It also gave me a patience for aspects of Berlin life that I found a bit repetitive. For example, in Berlin, the shops are a lot smaller and the portions are a lot smaller, which means I have to do my grocery shopping a lot more. And in the beginning, I found that kind of frustrating. I was like, this is a waste of time. But now I actually see it as a very subtle way that the community is strengthening its bonds by forcing you to collide over and over and over at a more regular cadence. All right. My second observation is that inefficiency can help build community. Some of you will share my original frustrations with the package delivery system here. I was used to New York efficiency, where you can order an Amazon package, and 2 hours later, your doorman will call you and say, come down and get it. So imagine my surprise the first time I ordered a package in Berlin, and 1 week later, I got a little slip in my mailbox that said, hey, your package is 5 minutes down the road. Have fun go getting it. What? But eventually my frustration started to wane. Each of these DHL slips introduced me to a brand new neighbor that I had never met before, or a brand new local business I hadn't ventured into at all. And every time I would have these interactions with someone, I would be like, sorry, package. And they would feel very empathetic and kind, and I would feel very grateful. And I eventually came to appreciate the system that has built in exactly the right amount of inefficiency to forge these moments of neighborly kindness and connection while still getting me what I needed in the end, albeit a bit slower. I've experienced this trade-off in other ways, too. For example, when I take transit instead of a car, sometimes it's slower. Or if I go to the wash salon instead of having my own machine, it's less efficient. And yet it creates more opportunity for serendipitous collisions with people around me. So, principle number 2, relaxing the desire for efficiency makes room for serendipity. My final observation is based off of a saying that you might have heard before. Life imitates art, art imitates life. The same thing is true for place. In a place, we embed our attitudes that we have for each other, and in turn, the place informs our attitudes that we have for each other. On a very hot day, I was walking my dog. It was very, very hot during a heat wave. And about 10 minutes in, he drags me to this water bowl that's a couple meters in front of a shop. And as he's slurping away, I'm looking up. I'm like, where am I? What is this place? And it's a coffee shop. And it has a sign that says, "Dogs are not allowed." And I found this very interesting, because here's a business that does not allow dogs, and yet they have somebody who every morning takes a bowl, fills it with water, puts it outside, pays attention to it throughout the day to make sure it has water and it's like a cool temperature. It was basically a relic in the public realm that said, hey, I have this boundary, you can't come in, but I still see you and I can care for your needs. And that's really beautiful. This works the other way around too, where the public realm can inform our attitudes towards other people. I had this experience before the pandemic. In New York, I would commute every morning into Manhattan from Brooklyn. And those of you who've been to Manhattan before know that it is a lot denser there than Berlin, and the sidewalks are a lot smaller, and they're often covered in bags of garbage. So it's very narrow. And every morning, as I would commute, I'd be squeezing my way through the sidewalks and thinking, these people around me, what's wrong with them? They're so slow. They ceased to become my neighbors or potential friends and instead became obstacles in my way. I'm sure none of you have had that experience. I'm just a curmudgeon. But yeah, I think, I don't know where I'm going with that. All right, so this experience for me of immigrating to Berlin fundamentally challenged my conception of how a city creates belonging. Because before, I was focusing exclusively on communities that existed and had a shared identity. And now I see that the public realm is actually a container for informal interaction with strangers as well. And the way that we shape that container has tangible effects on like how we treat each other, how we feel about each other, how we feel our sense of community and sense of belonging in a city. Cool. So to conclude, I guess I should tell you a little bit about why these observations might matter. I think for me as a technologist, my bias is to think about user experience, and that often means efficiency. Like how can we optimize for things to be like fast and as frictionless as possible? But user experience can also be other things, and we can be really intentional about what we want it to be. So for example, in designing an airport, maybe we really value efficiency. Like nobody is looking for their primary sense of community in an airport. They just want to get from point A to point B as frictionless as possible. But in other areas, like third spaces, you know, like coffee shops, parks, nightclubs, things like that, maybe we want to optimize for other things, like belonging, community. So yeah, to conclude, I will leave you with a little bit of homework, which is, after you leave today, go and think about a space that you manage, whether it's an office or a coffee shop or even just your bedroom, and think about what you want people to feel when they're in that space. Is it a sense of ease, a sense of efficiency, a sense of belonging? And think about whether your space, the way it's structured, matches that intent. What are the subliminal messages that your space is sending? What are the ways that it is shaping interactions of people in that space, both intentional and informal? And then think about what is one small thing you can do to add to that space, to deepen that feeling one notch more. All right, thank you all for listening to me today. If you'd like to keep engaging, you can DM me on Twitter. My handle is @meansinfinity. And actually, I did great on time, so if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them as well. Oh, sure. So the question was, I said I developed an app to track belonging. What is the data set for that? So actually, we digitized a protocol created by the Gill Institute for Public Life that is called Public Life, Public Space Studies. And basically, the way that these studies work are you take information about the surrounding area of your public space and who you would expect to be there. For example, what is the ethnic makeup? What is the gender breakdown? What is like the breakdown of like physical ability, age, like whatever you're interested in. And then normally how public life studies work is that you have a volunteer and you send them to that public space and they take a clipboard with these sheets, survey sheets, and they basically take counts of like who's there every hour and what they're doing. So for example, maybe there's like 10 people who are like sitting and eating and they have this demographic information, and there's like 20 people who are just passing through the space. And once you take these snapshots, you're able to compare who is like remaining in a space and who is just like passing through, meaning like who is there but who feels unwelcome or for whatever reason are not sticking around, as well as who do you expect to be there. So for example, if let's say you're in a neighborhood that has like a 50-50 gender split, but you notice that in this park that it's exclusively people who seem like they're men, and they're all between the ages of like 20 and 30. You're able to then focus your study on like what is causing that difference. And this was actually like a real life example. I think it was in Seattle where they found a corridor where they found that disparity between like the genders who were like going through the space and the genders that were lingering. And they did some surveys and they introduced some interventions. I think it was like more lighting, and they cut down the size of the hedges. And they had learned that it was an issue of perceived safety. So once they addressed that, they were able to do another study, like another follow-up thing with public life surveys, and found that that disparity was like rectified. Yeah, does that answer your question? Great, thank you.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. What you said reminded me a bit about the writings of Jane Jacobs. I'm sure you're familiar with her. And there's this famous book from her, I think The Life and Death of American Cities, where she writes about a corner store guy, a guy who runs a corner shop, but who also fulfills more functions in this social ecosystem, like on this crossroad. He helps the kids that come from school, he gives them information, he looks out for things. You know, he's more than just a shop owner. He's part of a social system. So when we think about technology, I was thinking a lot about situations where we would replace these social actors through a technological solution, and found myself worrying whether we would lose these additional dimensions. You know what I mean? And I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I think about. And I don't have like an answer for you of how we don't do that. But I think that if we're mindful about the things that we're trying to preserve in a city and the things that we value, and acknowledge that it's not just efficiency that we value in a city, we can introduce technology in a way that accounts for those things. So for example, like if we're only trying to see like, oh, how quickly can someone buy their vegetables, we might introduce like a vending machine, right, for vegetables on the block and replace that guy. But if we're able to like acknowledge that there are other values that we care about that he provides, then we can bring that into the conversation of should we replace this guy with a vending machine or not. And I think the tricky part is some of those intangibles are a little bit harder to measure, right? It's like efficiency, you can just say, oh yeah, what is the time it takes to like accomplish this task? But it's a lot harder to measure, like, what is the feeling that people feel when they accomplish this task? Or how rooted do they feel in their community through this one task or through this collection of similar tasks? It's a little bit harder, yeah. Thank you for the question. Cool. Well, thank you again for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. Ciao.